Stop everything you're doing because Hollywood just cracked open in a way nobody saw coming. An alleged single sentence has now detonated into a full-blown celebrity firestorm, and it's dragging names that were never supposed to be involved. Blake Lively is suddenly at the center of a jaw-dropping controversy, one that insiders are calling the messiest power clash of the decade. One phrase. And allegedly, that phrase changed everything. Sources are quietly whispering that what started as a creative discussion has now spiraled into something far darker. Darker emails, panic texts, and an internal Hollywood meltdown that studios are desperate to contain. But here's the part nobody was ready for. Just when everyone thought this drama couldn't grow any bigger, TheRock's name shows up, and a warning. No explanation. Just a sudden appearance in documents that instantly set social media on fire. Was this a mistake? A coincidence? Or proof that something much bigger has been bubbling beneath the surface for years? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear connects egos, power, pride, and fear, and by the end of this video, you'll be asking one terrifying question: was this ever about a movie? Or was it always about control? To understand how this story allegedly detonated the way it did, you have to look past the red carpets, the media smiles, and the carefully curated Hollywood images, because behind the scenes, everything was already under pressure long before the public knew. A single word, on the surface, "It ends with us," was supposed to be safe, emotional, prestige-driven, and reputation-proof. The kind of project studios love because controversy isn't supposed to touch it. And when Blake Lively's involvement became public, the industry exhaled. She wasn't just a star, she was a brand, trusted, protected, untouchable. But insiders claim that the moment cameras stopped rolling and creative meetings began, something shifted. What was initially framed as deep artistic collaboration allegedly turned into a subtle power struggle. People close to the set whisper that early enthusiasm quickly gave way to tension that nobody wanted to acknowledge out loud. The vibes, as one alleged insider put it, were off but professionally polite. This wasn't shouting. This wasn't chaos. This was quiet discomfort, the most dangerous kind. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly became emotionally charged. Words were dissected. Meanings were questioned. Tone mattered more than intention. And sources say Blake became increasingly sensitive to how her role and her presence was being discussed. That's when the now infamous phrase allegedly entered the picture, a line that, in another context, might have been dismissed as poetic or theatrical, but here, it allegedly landed differently. And once that line was spoken, according to whispers, it could never be unsaid. From that point forward, creative disagreement allegedly evolved into something much heavier. Emails became longer. Meetings became formal. Notes were saved. Screenshots were taken. Suddenly, people weren't just collaborating, they were protecting themselves. And this is where Ryan Reynolds reportedly enters the deeper layer of the story. To fans, Ryan is charm, humor, and effortless likability. But insiders claim when it comes to protecting his inner circle, the joke stops fast. Those close to the situation allege that once he sensed potential damage to Blake's image, strategy replaced patience. Now, whether that strategy was defensive or aggressive depends entirely on who you ask, and that's where this story fractures. One side claims Blake felt unheard, diminished, and subtly disrespected. The other side claims the situation was being blown out of proportion, retroactively reframed, and emotionally weaponized. And then, lawyers started appearing. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly. Consultations turned into planning. Planning turned into positions. And positions turned into lines in the sand. People who were once friendly allegedly stopped sitting in the same room. Assistants were told not to communicate directly. Every interaction suddenly required witnesses. That's when the anxiety spread. Producers, publicists, even third-party consultants allegedly began whispering the same question: is this going to explode? And it didn't just affect one film, because behind the scenes, reputations are currency, and once that currency is threatened, fear spreads faster than facts. The situation allegedly escalated again when those infamous private messages surfaced, messages that would later be described by insiders as the emotional backbone of the defense. Messages that didn't sound apologetic. They sounded resolute. To some, that resolve read as confidence. To others, it read as defiance, and Hollywood despises defiance because defiance disrupts narratives. Defiance refuses to play the expected role. At the same time, Speculation around a larger PR ecosystem began to circulate: consultants, reputation managers, shadow networks quietly working to influence perception. Suddenly, this wasn't just about two sides disagreeing, it was about who controls the story. And that's where paranoia allegedly set in. Who's leaking? Who's protecting whom? Who benefits if this goes public? Insiders claim that by this point, the original issue had been almost completely buried under something far more dangerous: ego, fear, and power. And then just when people thought the blast radius had been mapped, another name began appearing in conversations where it supposedly didn't belong. A name so big that even a whisper could shake the industry. That name wouldn't just complicate things, it would change the stakes entirely. And once that happened, there was no going back. The moment everything allegedly crossed the line wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It didn't happen on a set or in front of cameras or during some dramatic confrontation. According to multiple insider sources, it happened quietly behind screens, inside private threads, where tone can be denied and intent can be questioned. That's when the conflict stopped being emotional and started becoming strategic. What had once been framed as a misunderstanding was now allegedly treated like a case file. Screenshots, timelines, saved voice notes, and according to whispers from people close to the situation, Blake's camp began reframing the narrative internally. The phrase that triggered everything wasn't just uncomfortable anymore, it was being described as symbolic of a larger pattern. Suddenly, the issue allegedly wasn't what was said, but what it meant. This is where things reportedly fractured beyond repair, because on the other side, that accusation landed like a betrayal. Sources claim Justin and his inner circle were blindsided by how quickly creative language was being recast as something darker. What they thought would be resolved quietly was now being positioned as a moral violation, and that's when the messages dropped. Private texts never intended to be seen, never written for public consumption, allegedly surfaced in legal discussions. Messages that insiders say changed the entire tone of the fight. They were not calm. They were not apologetic. They were furious. The most shocking part, they didn't sound afraid. One alleged message, according to sources familiar with it, made the room go dead silent. "We are not doing this. We're not admitting to something we didn't do." That line, allegedly written by someone closest to Justin, marked the shift from negotiation to war, because in Hollywood, refusal is dangerous, according to insiders. Blake's side interpreted this resistance not as clarification but as escalation. What was meant to de-escalate allegedly did the opposite, and suddenly, the label appeared: retaliation. That single word flipped the entire narrative. From that moment on, everything the other side did, every email, every refusal, every legal consultation was allegedly filtered through that accusation. Even silence began to look suspicious. But then came the first twist, a timeline crack. Sources claim someone asked a question that nobody could answer cleanly. How can retaliation happen before the accusation is formally defined? That question reportedly caused panic, because if the actions being labeled as retaliation happen first, the framing collapses. And if the framing collapses, the credibility battle becomes far more dangerous. According to whispers, that realization triggered internal stress fractures. Advisors disagreed. Consultants argued. Some urged restraint. Others demanded pressure. Because refusing to take a side became a side, celebrities started posting vague messages about truth, context, and growth. Some liked posts they later unliked. Others turned comments off entirely. Meanwhile, reaction channels exploded. YouTube videos popped up by the hour. Podcast thumbnails screamed scandal. Every creator swore they had sources. And with each retelling, the story grew darker, more dramatic, and further from its original shape. Hollywood trades reportedly labeled the situation radioactive, not because of what was proven but because of what might surface next, behind closed doors. Insiders say agencies began asking hard questions. Can this client become a liability? What happens if another name drops? If this expands, who gets burned? Fear replaced loyalty. Even past collaborators allegedly began quietly reassessing their proximity to the situation. Old praise turned into awkward distance. Promises turned into unanswered emails, and then another shockwave. Anonymous polls started trending online. Who do you believe? Who's lying? Who's playing the system? Tens of thousands voted. The split was brutal and revealing. because it wasn't about truth anymore. It was about narrative alignment. People weren't choosing sides based on evidence. They were choosing based on identity, emotion, and distrust of power, and that's when the industry started to fracture. Some insiders reportedly pushed for full transparency, release everything, end the speculation. Others demanded total lockdown, no leaks, no movement, no words. Neither side won, because the moment public curiosity reaches critical mass, control becomes impossible. And just as the fury reached its peak, one more detail surfaced: small, quiet, and deeply unsettling. A source allegedly confirmed that multiple brands and projects were already re-evaluating future involvement, not out of guilt but out of fear of unpredictability. That detail sent a chill through the industry, because it meant the fallout was no longer hypothetical. It was happening, and the most disturbing part, nobody knew who would be hurt next, because in Hollywood, when narratives spiral without resolution, the crowd doesn't wait for answers. It moves on, and it leaves damage behind. Which begged the most dangerous question of all: if this is the reaction already, what happens when the next reveal hits? Just when it seemed like the chaos couldn't stretch any further, it did, because according to multiple unverified but persistent insider whispers, the story everyone thinks they understand may only be half the picture. And the part that hasn't surfaced yet? That's the part Hollywood is quietly terrified of. Late-stage rumors began circulating that additional private communications exist, messages that were never included in early discussions, never summarized in leaks, and never hinted at publicly. Messages that allegedly change who started what and why. One insider, speaking anonymously in a now-deleted voice note, allegedly said something chilling: if the next batch ever gets out, it won't just embarrass people, it will expose intent. That single word, intent, sent shockwaves through inner circles, because misunderstanding can be forgiven, intent cannot. According to speculation, these unseen messages allegedly complicate the timeline in ways no one wants to explain yet. Conversations that don't line up, emotional reactions that contradict public positions, moments where certainty suddenly collapses. And then came the most unsettling part of all. Sources claim that at least one powerful figure someone never publicly mentioned, never whispered about online, is actively working to keep certain details buried, not because they caused the chaos, but because they benefited from it. That implication alone reframed everything. Was this ever about offense? Or was it about leverage? And then, another rumor spread quietly but rapidly, that a major player, someone with serious influence, has begun distancing themselves privately, preparing for an exit before the next wave hits. No announcements, no sudden public statements, just quiet detachment, the kind that only happens when someone knows what's coming. Meanwhile, insiders claim both sides are now operating under one shared fear: losing control of the narrative entirely. Because once competing versions of truth collide in public, no amount of PR can fully restore order. And here's where the cliffhanger tightens. According to whispers, the next potential reveal won't come from leaks or social media. It will come from records, documents, timelines, receipts. Not emotional interpretations, but cold, unfeeling facts. And those facts, allegedly, don't favor just one side. They complicate everyone. One industry veteran reportedly summed it up like this: if this escalates again, there won't be heroes, just survivors. That's why the silence has grown heavier. That's why responses have slowed. That's why everyone is watching, and no one is speaking, because the next move won't just escalate the drama. It will define who walks away clean and who doesn't. And until that moment arrives, this story remains unfinished, suspended, unstable, and dangerously close to blowing wide open. Because in Hollywood, the most devastating reveal is never the loudest one. It's the one that arrives quietly and changes everything overnight. And whatever comes next, it's already in motion. Now it's your turn, because this story doesn't live in a courtroom or behind studio doors anymore. It lives right here. Was this a genuine misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Or do you believe something much darker has been happening behind the scenes all along? Who do you think is really pulling the strings? Is this about hurt feelings, or about power, leverage, and control in Hollywood? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but be warned, this debate is already tearing the internet in half. Read what others are saying, challenge them, defend your take, This is where the real conversation starts. If this story shocked you, hit that like button so more people see it. If you want updates the moment the next twist drops, subscribe and turn on notifications because trust me, this is far from over. And one more thing. Insiders are already hinting at another development that could flip the narrative again. New details, new names, new fallout. So stay right here, because the next chapter in this saga may not just change opinions. It may change careers, and when it does, you'll want to say you heard it here first. And that's when the demands allegedly came in: a statement, a broad apology, a vague acceptance of blame, not specifics, not clarity, just accountability. But the other side refused, and this is where the conflict mutated, because refusal wasn't interpreted as innocence, it was interpreted as defiance. And defiance, in a power-driven ecosystem like Hollywood, is almost unforgivable. Insiders claim phone calls became colder, messages became legal, faces hardened. This wasn't about working it out anymore. This was about one thing: who controls the ending. And then when most people thought the battlefield was clearly defined, something happened that nobody anticipated. A name appeared, not as an accusation, not as a participant, but as a shadow, buried in communications referencing PR strategy, anonymous sites, and reputation management. According to speculative sources, a familiar name surfaced in passing. Not central, not explained, just there. That name sent shockwaves through the room, because it didn't belong in this story. And if it truly didn't belong, why was it mentioned at all? Some insiders believe it was coincidence. Others suspect leverage, and a few whispered something far more alarming. This is bigger than any of them realized. That single appearance didn't just complicate matters, it expanded the blast radius. People who thought they were observers suddenly worried they were connected by proximity alone. Studios reportedly panicked. Publicists went dark. Phones stopped ringing. And the first domino finally fell. Because once that shadow entered the narrative, this was no longer about intentions, language, or feelings. It was about damage control, and everyone knew one thing for sure: the next reveal wouldn't just escalate the story. It would rewrite it. If the first twist cracked the foundation, what came next allegedly blew the doors off completely. Because once that unexpected name surfaced, once the shadow entered the room, panic reportedly rippled through Hollywood faster than anyone could contain it. What insiders had hoped would stay sealed within private legal frameworks began leaking into places it was never meant to reach. Group chats froze. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were abruptly canceled with no explanation. And then the internet noticed. According to alleged insiders, anonymous posts started appearing across social platforms, vague at first, but deliberate. They didn't name names outright. They didn't accuse directly. Instead, they asked questions. And in today's media ecosystem, questions are sometimes more dangerous than accusations. Why is this name appearing in unrelated legal conversations? Who benefits if reputations quietly implode? What's really happening behind closed doors? The speculation exploded. Hollywood blogs began hinting at unseen players. Comment sections caught fire with conspiracy threads. And suddenly, what had been a private dispute was surfacing in public consciousness. Then came the reveal that sent insiders spiraling. According to speculative reports, investigators began looking into a network of anonymous website sites that appeared suddenly, carried aggressive narratives, and disappeared just as fast. At first, they seemed unrelated, random, chaotic, until patterns allegedly emerged: shared hosting, similar language structures, overlapping timelines, and buried in internal communications discussing those websites. Communications never meant to be scrutinized was a thread referencing previous PR entanglements, past clients, and reputational fires that had once burned quietly and been extinguished before anyone noticed. That's when alleged insiders say the room went quiet. Because if this wasn't random, if these weren't isolated reactions, then someone had been preparing narratives long before the public ever saw smoke. That realization allegedly reframed everything. This wasn't just conflict spiraling out of control. This felt prepared, layered, strategic. People close to the situation whisper that emotions were no longer driving decisions. Fear was. Fear of association, fear of exposure, fear of being pulled into something they never signed up for. And then, according to sources, Another shock landed. A private legal review allegedly flagged something deeply unsettling. Multiple parties were now acting under different assumptions of reality. Each side believed they were responding to threats the others either denied or didn't even acknowledge existed. In other words, everyone was reacting, but to different versions of the truth, and that's when control slipped completely. Fake insider tweets began circulating wildly. "I've seen the docs. This goes back years. Y'all think this is about one phrase? Think again. Hollywood is about to eat itself." Deleted within minutes but screenshotted forever. Journalists reportedly reached out for confirmation. PR teams refused comment. Silence became deafening. Behind the scenes, sources claim crisis meetings were happening hourly. The question was no longer who's right. It was who survives. Because the moment reputational networks enter a legal fight, the rules change, and then the shocking reveal. According to alleged whispers, someone high up asked a question that froze the room. If our names are being mentioned indirectly now, who's next? That's when insiders say the realization hit hardest. This case wasn't growing linearly. It was branching. Every connection spawned another risk. Every mention created collateral damage. The dispute had escaped its original boundaries. At this stage, Hollywood wasn't watching anymore. It was bracing. Because when narratives spin out of control, truth becomes secondary to survival, and survival requires sacrifice. And just as everyone thought the chaos had peaked, another drop was rumored to be coming. Another set of communications, another layer of context, another perspective that could flip everything on its head. One insider supposedly said it best: "The worst part, nobody knows what side this next reveal will hurt." And that uncertainty, that's what made this moment terrifying. Because once escalation reaches this level, there's only one direction left, and the next reveal wouldn't just raise questions. It would force answers whether anyone was ready or not. The moment whispers escaped into the public sphere, the reaction was instant and completely out of control. Hollywood didn't respond with statements. It responded with chaos. Within hours, social media timelines were flooded with theories, accusations, and emotional breakdowns disguised as hot takes. Hashtags formed organically, clashing with one another like rival armies. One side accused Blake of weaponizing language. The other accused the opposing camp of gaslighting and power plays. There was no middle ground. Fans who once praised the film for its emotional depth were now using that same emotion as ammunition. Comment sections turned savage. Threads stretched for thousands of replies, dissecting every word, every quote, every alleged leak, as if it were evidence in a global courtroom. And the thing that set the internet on fire? Silence. No official statements. No clarifications. No calming explanations, just absence. And in the digital age, silence is interpreted as guilt by everyone. Some fans declared Blake brave for speaking up, calling her the latest symbol of confronting Hollywood's hidden culture. Others accused her of rewriting intent to gain leverage, claiming the situation felt manufactured, inflated, or strategically timed. Then came the reaction that shifted everything again. Industry insiders began reacting, but not publicly. Sudden unfollows, deleted photos, canceled podcast appearances, subtle moves but deafening to anyone paying attention. Producers quietly distanced themselves. Publicists reportedly advised clients to avoid mentioning any involved names at all. Studios began monitoring social sentiment like it was a stock market crash. Because reputation in this industry isn't destroyed by facts, it's destroyed by association. Fake insider accounts escalated the madness. I work in PR. This is way bigger than people realize. There's already fallout happening. Behind the scenes, y'all just can't see it yet. Careers will quietly stall over this. True or not, it didn't matter. The perception was enough. Suddenly, unrelated celebrities were dragged into comment sections with one question: where do you stand? And that's when it turned toxic.